crude oil prices rising to new highs, and bulk of this coming on the developing story here that Saudi Arabia and Russia are going to extend their supply cuts that they've had going for the last several months. They want to kick it out another few months here. We'll get into that in a second, but I first want to look at some price action here, because a little bit of an under the radar move in crude oil. These are the prices year to date, and you can see here for WTI futures rising above $85 a barrel in the last couple of sessions for the first time all year, and got all the way up to $88 a barrel at their highs. And not only is this, story around the supply cut extension part of it here, but also starting to see a string of just very bullish days here for crude the last couple of sessions. You can see that this market can be very range bound. Looking back to the start of the year, we spend a lot of time in crude oil prices here in like $5 ranges. Now, of course, as a disclaimer, this market is capable of doing anything. I mean, if you want to know what this market's capable of doing, just look over the course of the last 3 years, and you'll find a market that at one point sank all the way down to negative in terms of some crude oil futures contracts. And then at another point, got all the way up to $120 a barrel. But that being said, in recent trade, in the course of a couple of months, you see this market bounce back and forth in $5 ranges. The first couple months of the year, down to 75, back up to 80, down to 75, back up to 80. A lot of bouncing back and forth. A quick break down to 70, bounce back to 75, and then back in that 75 to 80 range, 75 to 80 range. Some bouncing around in May, June, and July of 70 to 75, and then a climb all the way up of $80 a barrel here. And we've been in this 80 to 85 range, and now really breaking out of that. We'll see if 85 to 90 is the new range, or if they're going to fall back lower. But either way, a really crazy move here to the upside in crude oil prices, and coming for a relatively simple idea. And that's what a lot of people feel like they can kind of wrap their mind around a crude oil market, because it is a commodity market that's largely driven by supply and demand. Now, of course, there's so much going on within this this commodity space. I think a lot of people can think like, oh, it's so simple. It's so much more simple than, say, Apple stock, which has so many divisions, so many moving pieces, so many products and everything else. It's just crude oil. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to it, the different byproducts of crude oil, gasoline, jet fuel, the supply and demand of those markets, and so on and so forth. But you can reduce it down to a couple of simple ideas, supply and demand. Bullish ideas being supply down or demand up, bearish being too much supply or not enough demand. And this is a pretty classic supply down type of scenario, and you're seeing some bullish action coincide with it, given that Saudi Arabia and Russia, huge global producers of crude oil, have extended their supply cuts. And you probably read stories about OPEC and these different groupings of crude oil suppliers that they will, if supply is getting too high and crude oil prices are getting too low, that it's not worth it for them to be, drilling. They're not making enough money off of it. They will come out and say, hey, we're going to stop drilling so much. We're going to stop producing so much of this supply. And in the same way that vice versa, if prices are screaming off the page to the upside, supply will increase. They're making so much money per barrel, they're going to make more barrels, right? And so we're seeing a little bit of that supply lower continuation out of them. But of course, if this does coincide with some of the global pessimism we've been seeing out of, for example, China, and demand for crude oil does move lower, you might see a counter move, a bearish move along with that. So again, can be reduced to kind of simple ideas, but there is a lot going on here to keep track of. And as an example of that, I did want to look at the last couple of years of price action here in crude, high being up around 120 and now edging closer to $90 a barrel in that higher tier of the last couple of years. But yeah, keep in mind that developments can come out of nowhere. For example, the pandemic, the early part of 2020 there, crude oil prices getting down to the 30 handle, the 20 handle, the 10 handle. And there's the classic story of, as we were seeing some of the peak of pandemic fears in the middle part of 2020, there was a crude oil future expiring the same week as one of those really fearful weeks of, global economic slowdown amid the pandemic there. And one of those crude oil markets, and keep in mind, I don't want to go too deep, but crude oil futures that are close to expiration can be particularly volatile or vulnerable, let's say sensitive to supply and demand, than crude oil futures that have months or years until expiration. And that market went negative. And that was, a big, crazy event. So this is all to say, can see big swings back and forth, but edging a little bit higher and have people questioning, how high can this market get? Before that Russian-Ukrainian war that broke out, the high in crude going back all the way to before the financial crisis in 2008 was around $100 a barrel. So it'll be really interesting to see now, obviously higher than the average crude oil price of around $70 a barrel. Will 100, what was historically prior to 2022, the high for crude, will that hold, or can this market get back up above $100 and do some trading in there? But again, the reason that it's rallying because of these supply cuts, if the market gets to a certain price that's the producers in Saudi Arabia and Russia and everything else just can't help themselves but make more barrels to take advantage of that higher price, then you could have that swing of lower supply move this market lower. But for the time being, crude oil on a heck of a run in a recent trade due to some of these supply cut extensions that we're seeing globally.